Hello, I am Dr. Lisa Van Hoos, a board member of the Physical Therapy Learning Institute, known as PTLI. Dr. Geneva Johnson had the vision of creating PTLI, and Dr. Lynda Woodruff partnered with Dr. Johnson as a co-founder to bring that dream to fruition. Dr. Woodruff's passion for bringing equality and equity to education and our profession remains a focus of PTLI initiatives today. PTLI, along with many other partners, welcomes everyone to the inaugural Lynda D. Woodruff Lecture on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Physical Therapy. This lecture is co-sponsored by the American Academy of Physical Therapy, which was co-founded by Dr. Woodruff, and its mission is to encourage and support minorities in the pursuit of physical therapy careers. Dr. Woodruff was a member and a leader within the American Physical Therapy Association, the APTA. And the organization has served as a vital co-sponsor in the development of today's lecture and the events to follow. We are thankful for the support from the University of Delaware, and we are excited to hear the wisdom of our esteemed speaker in a few minutes. To Dr. Woodruff's family, we want to formally express our collective grief in the loss of an amazing human. However, we are blessed that you shared a piece of her with each of us. To each and every Woody baby in the world, as educational and professional descendants of Dr. Woodruff, we know that you will continue to lead in creating a better future for the profession and the world. On September 29, 1947, Dr. Lynda D. Woodruff was called into existence as a social justice leader. Lynchburg, Virginia would be the first court-ordered desegregation attempt in the state, following the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King came to her home prior to the high school transfer to mentor her in nonviolence tactics, which would be needed in the all-white high school. 20 black students would voluntarily enroll, but only 4 would answer the call. In January 1962, at the age of 14, Dr. Woodruff transferred from Dunbar High School to E.C. Glass High School as one of 2 African American students leading the Lynchburg, Virginia school integration efforts. Dr. Woodruff entered the high school first, followed by her childhood friend, Owen C. Cardwell, Jr. She would graduate from E.C. Glass High School in 1965. She earned her undergraduate degree from Case Western Reserve University in 1969, and while there she entered the physical therapy profession to merge her loves of science and service by earning a master's degree in physical therapy in 1971. She was awarded a PhD from Georgia State in 1984. Dr. Lynda D. Woodruff's life continued to be full of firsts and other trailblazing efforts and events in academia, research, and advocacy. Dr. Woodruff was the first African American to join the faculty in the Division of Physical Therapy at the School of Medicine at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 1974. Dr. Woodruff founded the PT programs at Georgia State and North Georgia College. The Georgia State program was nationally recognized for its award-winning minority recruitment and retention efforts, and the North Georgia College program was the state's first post-baccalaureate physical therapist education program. She served as a consultant during the founding of the PT program at Alabama State University and would later serve as a faculty member at Alabama State University. She also had affiliations with Morehouse School of Medicine and Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions. Dr. Woodruff was an example of scholastic excellence and published over 30 professional publications. She was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She was also a founding member of the Foundation for Physical Therapy, the Georgia Student Physical Therapy Organization, the North American Association of Laser Therapy, and the American Congress on Electromyography. She helped to establish the APTA's Advisory Council on Minority Affairs. She served as a site visitor and later a commissioner for the Commission on Accreditation in Physical Therapy Education. She was a Georgia delegate to the APTA House of Delegates, a member of the House of Delegates Election Committee, a member of the Partners of the Americas, working for almost 40 years building relationships between Brazilian and U.S. physical therapy programs, and She was a member of the Georgia State Board of Physical Therapy. February 24, 2006 was declared the Lynda D. Woodruff Appreciation Day by the Georgia Senate. Her list of awards, y'all, is so long, for she was truly, truly a human of action. She unapologetically voiced the need to increase our profession's understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, and also our role in social justice. However, no one can say it better than Dr. Woodruff. Join me in listening to a brief excerpt from Dr. Woodruff's oral history, which can be located on the ACAP website.
I can just remember the emotion of picking up a report from the Institute of Medicine, very recent history, that said racial, cultural, and ethnic diversity is mandatory for successful outcomes. That was a turning point with me, because I could then quote the literature and say, I didn't say these things. The Institute of Medicine, now the National Institute of Health, and of course HHS, Health and Human Services, instituted an entire office, the U.S. Office of Minority Health. There is a direct physiological connection to knowing diversity, utilizing diversity, and understanding the physiological constructs of race inside of a physical therapy curriculum.
This inaugural lecture and the subsequent panel discussion on July 8th is to honor the life of Dr. Lynda D. Woodruff. Each sponsoring organization has initiatives to support Dr. Woodruff's vision through grants and scholarships. Each organization would welcome your donation to support their work. We encourage you to visit their websites and donate to help us continue Dr. Woodruff's legacy. It is now my privilege to introduce Dr. Greg Hicks as he describes his vision and how we can answer Dr. Woodruff's charge about the diversity, equity, and inclusion gaps and the opportunities that we must face and address as a doctoring profession. Dr. Hicks?
Welcome to the Lynda Woodruff Lecture. My name is Gregory Hicks. I'm a professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of Delaware and Associate Vice President for Clinical and Translational Research. The title of my talk today is Who Do We Want to Be? Responsible Stewardship of Our Profession. Back in October of 2019, I had the privilege of giving the Scully Lecture at the University of Pittsburgh. For that lecture, I was asked to choose a topic that would be a bit on the provocative side. After a lot of thought, I decided to speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our profession, a topic that's near and dear to my heart. The process of developing the Scully Lecture really allowed me to coalesce my thoughts at that time. Given the current unrest in our country surrounding the issues of systemic racism and social inequities, my thoughts have continued to evolve over time, and the result is what you will hear today in this inaugural Lynda Woodruff Lecture. While I did not have the opportunity to know Dr. Woodruff myself, I have only heard amazing things about her. Our APTA president, Sharon Dunn, has described Dr. Woodruff as a truly legendary champion for positive change and a stalwart advocate for our professional conscience for diversity and inclusion. I'm truly honored to be asked to give this lecture in her honor, and it just seems fitting. As you can see from the title, I really tried to wrestle through the question of who do we want to be as a profession when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what does responsible stewardship look like on that front? So as I pondered the question, who do we want to be as physical therapists, I pulled up the APTA strategic plan because I wanted to take a look at the wording of our vision statement for the profession, which I had read previously. When I read it again, the statement, it really resonated with me. We believe that we should be agents of change who transform society by optimizing movement to improve the human experience. It's aspirational, right? In that spirit, I want to take the time today to talk about where I think we need to be as agents of change. I want to talk about the disparities that exist in the greater healthcare landscape. and in physical therapy specifically, and how these disparities are perpetuated by a lack of racial and ethnic diversity in our profession. And finally, how these issues of unequal access and lack of diversity are directly linked to the lack of engagement by the greater physical therapy community in these important issues. When we say that we want to transform society, we have to acknowledge that we can't successfully transform our society, which includes all people, if we don't fully engage and consider the needs of all people. We also have to develop a stewardship plan that ensures the long-term viability of our profession. So my goal for today is to facilitate the journey towards action for each person listening to this talk. It's time that our words regarding healthcare disparities and the lack of diversity in our profession, they have to be replaced by action at this point. So as we consider who we want to be as a profession, I believe that there are a series of questions that must be asked and answered if we're going to engender enough conviction and action to become the physical therapy profession that we envision. So these are the 4 questions that I will focus on throughout the remainder of this talk. And as we answer these questions, I think we'll be well positioned to act. These are questions that I use in my own work life whenever I'm starting on a new venture. I feel like it helps me to work through where I think we need to go. The very first question is, who are we right now? What's the current state of affairs? If you don't understand where you are, you're not going to be able to really successfully move forward. The next question, what aren't we doing? So what's the opportunity that exists for us to jump into? Third question, how do we get to where we want to be? Are there others who are doing something similar to what we would hope to do or aspire to do? Should we be emulating someone else? What is our pathway? And then finally, what will be different when we get there? And that's all about examination of potential impact of the work. So we start with, who are we right now? So if we go back to just over a little over 20 years ago, 1999, Congress commissioned the Institute of Medicine to explore the extent of racial and ethnic disparities in the US healthcare system. In the document Unequal Treatment, the Institute of Medicine found that disparities definitely exist and they're associated with negative health outcomes for racial and ethnic minority groups. They also found that much of the disparity comes from the way in which we deliver healthcare in our country. They were struck by the consistency of research findings across diseases, across disciplines, that all mounted up in the same way. First main similarity, minorities are less likely than whites to receive needed services, including medically necessary procedures. So we're not talking about total joint replacements. We're talking about truly clinically necessary procedures. These disparities exist across the spectrum from cancer to cardiovascular disease, HIV/AIDS, diabetes, mental illness, and even rehabilitation. They also consistently found that racial differences in patients' attitudes do not fully explain the racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare. There are many who would presume that ethnic and racial groups are actually choosing not to have certain services, and that's where the disparity comes from. There's absolutely no data to support this assertion. So let's say that someone is still not on board with the idea of eliminating disparities just because it's the right thing to do. Maybe a look at the economic underpinnings of the problem will be convincing. So in this study by Tom Leviste, they examined the financial cost of healthcare disparities. They estimated that in excess of $230 billion was spent in direct medical costs over a 3-year period of time due to racial and ethnic health inequalities. That's a tremendous amount of money. That's just direct medical costs. Now, if we look at indirect medical costs by way of lost work time to illness and premature death, they estimated in excess of $1 trillion was spent in indirect medical costs over a 3-year period of time. So that's $1.3 trillion spent because of health inequalities. So even if you don't care about healthcare disparities and unequal treatment from the perspective of altruism or social justice, The financial burden on the healthcare system is tremendous, and this is one potential way to decrease costs. Studies have consistently shown that more streamlined care with reduced practice variability leads to decreased costs. In the 22nd annual Maley Lecture for the APTA, the University of Delaware's own Tara Jo Manal gave an incredible lecture entitled "Strike While the Iron is Hot." And in that talk, she challenged the physical therapy profession to resolve the issue of unwarranted variation in practice if we want our profession to successfully move forward. We've all gotten on board with the idea of reducing practice variability, but I haven't heard any discussion in the physical therapy community about the fact that healthcare disparities in our country is one of the biggest areas of tremendous practice variability. We need to reduce the variability in care between our racial and ethnic groups, and we have to be the ones to address this problem. Now let's gain an understanding of where we are as a PT community in understanding disparities related to physical therapy. So we'll start by looking at the body of work relative to healthcare disparities in general. We have a relatively large body of research here, pushing up to about 20,000 publications in this area. But if you look at healthcare disparities relative to physical therapy specifically, we have a much smaller body of literature, only 48 articles out of those nearly 20,000. That's equivalent to 0.024% of the healthcare disparities literature. Whereas nursing-related disparities occupies about 8% of the literature. Dentistry, close to 4%. So we really do have a limited base of knowledge at this point, and this is a point of improvement. Now let's begin to take a look at some of the research related to disparities in physical therapy. So in this study from Chun Fat, they compared rehabilitation healthcare utilization after trauma between Black and white trauma patients who were matched based on having similar injuries. An odds ratio of 1 would indicate no difference between groups, but an odds ratio of 0.59 that we see here demonstrates that compared to white patients, Black patients are 41% less likely to utilize injury-related outpatient visits and 36% less likely to utilize rehabilitation services. There's also some indication that they may be more likely to utilize the emergency department for injury-related care. Now let's take a look at work from Katana et al., looking at social disparities in early intervention service use. The odds of a child receiving PT services is reduced by 70% if the child is Black of non-Hispanic origin. Further, Black non-Hispanic children who receive physical therapy receive about an hour less per month than their white non-Hispanic peers. These are just a couple of representative studies in the physical therapy literature on disparities. As previously discussed, we have limited work in this area, but there is strong suggestion that there are similar types of disparities in our profession as we see in the greater healthcare landscape. And all of this points to the fact that we need to see more work in this area to get a handle on what needs to be done. Now let's move from disparities and discuss diversity within the profession, or the lack thereof. So if we look at the racial and ethnic demographics for the United States, we see from 2018 census data that approximately 60% of the US population is white, 13% Black, 18% Latino, 6% Asian, and 1% Native American. Here are what the numbers look like for the American Physical Therapy Association. We can see clearly that Blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans are underrepresented. If we look at PT faculty numbers from across the nation, they're quite similar to the APTA numbers. And then if we look at PT student numbers, they're a bit closer to the picture of our country, but there's still significant disparities. Let's take a look at the trend in PT student demographics. We see that the proportion of Black students has reduced over time. While we do see some increases in Latino and Asian students. Now let's take a look at how we compare to the field of medicine in terms of our matriculants. It's important to note that medical students are more closely representative of our nation's demographics, but this is a more recent occurrence, and we'll come back to this later as we discuss what I think we should be looking to do in our profession. So we go back to our first question, who are we? Well, Physical therapists are movement experts who optimize quality of life. We can all agree to that. But relative to our discussion today, I would also say that we are a relatively homogenous group of professionals who exist in a healthcare system with significant issues related to unequal access and healthcare disparities based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and geographic location. And to date, the physical therapy profession as a whole has done very little to address this public health concern. This is who we are right now. What aren't we doing? So if we go back to that Institute of Medicine report from 1999, they gave some recommendations, and one of their key recommendations was workforce diversification. It's seen as the missing link in reducing disparities and the associated costs. So how do we define underrepresented in physical therapy education? So I'd like to take a look at this definition that was developed by the Diversity Task Force from APTA in 2013. Here, underrepresented in PT education includes those racial and ethnic populations that are underrepresented in the PT profession relative to the general population. We've already looked at some of that data, and those groups are Black, Latino, Native Americans. This definition also includes individuals from geographically underrepresented areas, those from lower socioeconomic strata, and those from educationally disadvantaged backgrounds. And these are all areas of diversity that we should be looking at within our education system. So I said earlier that workforce diversification is the missing link. How so, you might ask? Well, it provides an opportunity to impact both the provider and the patient in some unique ways. With the provider, through peer interactions, we're able to blunt the impact of bias and prejudice in the clinical encounter. When physical therapists who come from different backgrounds are able to interact on a regular basis, they will start to understand each other in a different way. That will overflow into their relationships with their patients. For the patient, this will help reduce feelings of isolation and medical mistrust. So it's very powerful to have representation of self amongst your providers. Also, we have the modeling of positive interactions between diverse providers. You know, I think people often think when this topic is discussed that the idea is that only Black physical therapists should see Black patients, or only Latino physical therapists should see Latino patients. That is not the case. The idea is that you start to diversify the workforce. You start to break down some of these barriers and walls, and people understand each other better, and that will overflow to your patient interactions. So how do we get to where we want to be? Before we do that, I want to talk just a little bit about the evidence for the benefits of diversity. So let's look at what the scientific literature says about diversity in the workplace. This first study from Richard et al., they surveyed executives at 177 national banks in the United States. They explored the relationships between financial performance, racial diversity, and the emphasis that bank presidents put on innovation. If you look at the y-axis there, you see ROE, which is return on equity, and that's the preferred measure of a bank's financial performance. For innovation-focused banks, increases in racial diversity were clearly related to enhanced financial performance, but not so if innovation levels were low. It's interesting, right? This idea that in an innovative environment, diversity is important. Gender diversity can deliver the same kind of benefits. A very similar sort of study was done here by Deza and Ross. They showed that female representation in top management leads to better firm performance to the tune of $42 million, but only to the extent that the firm is focused on innovation. So very similar finding. And what's remarkably consistent in this body of literature is that when you identify one finding in one area of diversity, whether it be race, ethnicity, then you move to something like gender diversity, the findings really end up being very similar to each other. which gives us a lot more confidence that these findings are true and accurate. Here, let's take a look at racial diversity or surface level diversity. In this study from Phillips, they explored the impact of racial diversity on small decision-making groups in an experiment where sharing information was a requirement for success. So they formed 3-person groups that were either racially homogenous or not, and they had them perform a murder mystery exercise. All group members shared a common set of information, but each member also had important clues that only he or she knew. To find out who committed the murder, the group members would have to share all the information that they collectively possessed during the course of the discussion. And what they found was that the groups with racial diversity significantly outperformed the groups without racial diversity. Their thought was that being with similar others leads us to think we all hold the same information and share the same perspective. And the result is ineffective processing of information. We even see the same thing when we look at political affiliation diversity. These findings, once again, are incredibly consistent. This study demonstrated that pairings with political diversity had better outcomes than those without political diversity. And I love this quote: "When disagreement comes from a socially different person, we are prompted to work harder. Diversity jolts us into cognitive action in ways that homogeneity simply does not." I think that's really powerful, and that's something that we need to really be thinking about within our profession. So, why aren't underrepresented persons entering the physical therapy profession? Well, exposure is the #1 way that people come into the field of physical therapy. There's data to support that. Personally, I only found out about the profession when I decided that I wasn't going to medical school midway through my junior year. My parents weren't too happy. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I started talking to a friend who, from her freshman year, wanted to be a physical therapist because of her encounters in physical therapy. There are many excellent candidates out there who have not considered the profession because they just don't know about it. This leads us to those who are not yet ready for graduate education. We have students who have capacity to succeed and they have the interest, but they don't have the educational advantages necessary to make them a high-level candidate in many instances. So let's take GRE scores as an example. What are the ways that you can improve your GRE scores? Well, one, you can take them multiple times. Many PT schools will do super scoring, so they'll take the best score from the verbal, the best score from quantitative. You have to have the financial resources to pay for multiple testing sessions. Another way is to take a GRE prep course. Again, those are relatively expensive. So if you don't have financial resources, you could be on equal footing with another student, but if you don't have those same financial resources that the other person does, you are going to be left behind. Those are structural disadvantages that we have to start to address and think about. Then we have this issue of the economic value of DPT education versus other disciplines. So there are some who may choose another science or health-related discipline simply because the prospects of and earnings prospects are greater. Then finally, a lack of a coordinated, focused effort towards recruitment. This is something that we can do something about. So a comprehensive diversity action plan is needed, and workforce diversification, I believe, should be the centerpiece. It's going to require a multifactorial approach, and I think we can attack this through different pathways. Research, practice, education. Those are 3 pathways that I see very clearly where we could be intervening. And so what we're going to do now is take some time to talk about our potential for stewardship through these different pathways. And we're going to start with stewardship through research. So many of you are familiar with Dr. John Snow, who's considered the father of modern epidemiology. In the same way that Snow was instrumental in ending the cholera epidemic in 19th century England, by identifying the higher death rates near the Broad Street water pump and then removing the pump handle, we need to do the same thing. We need to explore disparities in physical therapy, identify risk factor patterns that would explain these disparities in physical therapy, and then act upon the identified risk factors. So we ask ourselves, where is our proverbial Broad Street water pump? We have to figure that out. So here's a very clear example of the type of PT-focused disparity studies that we need to point us in the right direction. Sandstrom and Bruins, they looked at outpatient physical therapy use for patients with arthritis, very common condition seen in physical therapy. Hispanic persons are 27% less likely to have a PT visit, whereas Black patients are 45% less likely. Why the difference? So when controlling for socioeconomic factors, the disparities for Hispanics goes away, but remains for Blacks, even though it is somewhat blunted. So these data begin to point us to potential intervention points to reduce disparities. These data would suggest that increased affordability for therapy services would likely reduce disparities in Hispanic persons, but unlikely to do so for Black Americans by itself. So there's a thought that improved patient education and awareness of the benefits of outpatient physical therapy may be necessary to reduce disparities amongst Black patients. I think this shows the power of having data. We have a clear evidence-based pathway that we consider following to reduce disparities in PT care for both Hispanic and Black patients with arthritis. So here are a few of my recommendations relative to research. First, there's a current push to develop a new clinical research agenda for the profession right now, and I'm involved with a committee, the Scientific and Practice Affairs Committee, and I would assert that any agenda should include disparities work, and the one that is forthcoming, I believe, will. We have also come to recognize that health services research is a realm in which we need to immerse ourselves as a profession. Our commitment is evidenced by CoSTAR that has been funded by the Foundation for Physical Therapy Research. CoSTAR is certainly a place where disparities work could be emphasized so that we can get a handle on this problem. We're now growing a cadre of researchers with the skill sets to investigate these questions from a health services perspective. We need this to happen. As a researcher, I can also say that we need to redouble our efforts to recruit diverse samples for all of our research studies if we're ever going to be able to generalize our findings to all people. I understand the tremendous effort as a researcher that's required here with all the pressures of recruitment. Sometimes it's just easier to take people into the study who are easy to find. But we have to dig in here and partner with researchers who have knowledge in this area, partner with people in the community who can help us to engage in the community. These people are out there. These people who will partner with us, they are out there, but we're going to have to do work to find them. This should not be an area in which we just pay lip service. Finally, recruiting underrepresented physical therapists as trainees in your labs. I would have never considered a career as a clinician scientist had it not been for senior PT faculty members who were recruiting me. As a matter of fact, I didn't even think I would be any good at it. And here I am today, moving into a role as Associate Vice President for Clinical and Translational Research. The thing is that people who look nothing like me saw something in me and they pursued me. When you speak into someone's life, it can be powerful for the good or for the bad. Choose the good and look for potential in people. I also believe that there's a strong role to be played by our clinical practice community relative to reducing disparities and improving equity and inclusion in our profession. The primary reason for entry into PT is exposure. Thus, the first avenue by which the clinical practice community can contribute is in the realm of community engagement. First, by increasing awareness of the profession in the community and helping people to understand the benefits of physical therapy for common conditions. Targeted marketing should be a part of our portfolio, going into senior centers, community centers, churches, to let people know what physical therapy can do for them. This will have a twofold impact. It will empower these undertreated communities to request PT services from their primary care providers, which is good for us. And it will get the word out about our profession to the young people in those communities so that PT has the opportunity to be on the radar as a potential career path. Remembering that exposure is the #1 pathway for entry into the profession. Next, by making a commitment to developing a pipeline for underrepresented student groups. These pipeline programs could be akin to Big Brother, Big Sister mentoring programs to engage these young people into the profession. By building those relationships in the community, we will open doors for these young people. Not everyone has parents or people in their lives who know what experiences are important for their children to have in order to develop a career that requires doctoral education. We can be the people who step into the gap for these young people. There are a multitude of advocacy initiatives underway through the APTA. By having our clinical community actively engaged in issues that impact access to care, we can make major strides in reducing disparities. We need our frontline clinicians to be engaged in these conversations. Then, for those larger healthcare systems and PT corporations, I would urge you to consider the development of corporate loan repayment initiatives for early career physical therapists who are willing to work in underserved and disadvantaged zones for a period of time in exchange for some partial repayment of their loans. I think that this could be a win-win situation all the way around. And then we all know that knowledge is power. Instituting quality assurance projects to understand PT care disparities within your own system and practices is really critical. I think it'd be really powerful for PT practices to gain a better understanding of any potential disparities that exist within their practice. Once you know what the problem is, you can work to fix it. And now let's talk about stewardship through education. I really believe that this is a key battleground right now. Let's be honest, if we don't diversify PT education, we will never diversify the field. So we need to act on this front. So I bring up this issue of the debt burden. I'm not going to spend much time here, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the impact of debt burden associated with physical therapy education. We see that entry-level salaries are flat, but education costs are rising. This problem has to be addressed, but this issue deserves a much broader conversation and its own separate conversation. But we really need to think about the fact that we already know this debt burden situation impacts all of our students. But in particular, it impacts those who are already disadvantaged to start with. They will never enter our profession unless we fix this problem. Now let's take some time to talk about the role of accreditation in regards to the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. According to the Institute of Medicine's Committee on Institutional Policy Level Strategies for Increasing Diversity within the U.S. healthcare workforce, accreditation standards play a critical role. By setting standards for educational programs and methods for institutional peer review, accrediting bodies should be able to help advance academic quality, ensure accountability to the public, encourage institutional improvement, and provide a mechanism for continual assessment of goals. As such, accreditation is an important vehicle for institutional change and a potential means to enhance diversity in the physical therapy profession. And CAPTA is our accrediting body for the profession. Currently, our CAPTA standards, from my perspective, address recruitment and retention of a diverse student body in a rather limited fashion compared to other healthcare disciplines. So if we take a look at required element 5A from CAPTA standards, and the bold emphasis is my own, this is what it says: recruitment practices are designed to enhance diversity of the student body. And then there's one piece of evidence of compliance that is required, and that is describe the efforts of the program to recruit a diverse student body. The word describe does not provoke action. Then in regards to retention, in required element 5E, retention practices support a diverse student body. The single evidence for compliance is describe how retention practices support a diverse student body. If we take a look at the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, or LCME, and this is the accrediting body for medical schools in North America, we see something different occurring here. As of 2009, they have written their standards in such a way that they will provoke action by the schools. MS8 says each medical school must develop programs or partnerships aimed at broadening diversity among qualified applicants to medical school admissions. The difference in what changed in 2009 was that the word must replaced the word should. So going from should to must, I'll show you data in a bit to see what sort of action came forward after that. They don't prescribe how you do it. Schools can accomplish this through a variety of approaches, including developing pipeline programs, collaborations with institutions that serve students from disadvantaged backgrounds, community service efforts, or academic enrichment programs. So there are a whole host of ways through which the schools can address this issue. And then there's IS 16, which states each medical school must have policies and practices to achieve appropriate diversity among students, faculty, staff, and other members of the academic community, and must engage in ongoing systematic and focused efforts to attract and retain students, faculty, staff, and others. The key here is that they don't just talk about the students, they talk about everyone who is a part of the medical education community. And they do this because they believe that aspiring future physicians will be best prepared for medical practice in a diverse society if they learn in an environment that is diverse and inclusive. I think this is what we want as a profession as well. So we have the fortune of having data to show us what happened after implementation of these standards within medical schools from this publication in JAMA in 2018. So just to orient you, in the upper left panel, we're looking at female matriculants and the proportion of female matriculants over time. So we have three phases that we're looking at. In the first phase, this is pre-implementation of these new LCME standards. So that time period is 2002 to 2009. In that time period, female matriculants were on the decline. They continued to decline throughout the implementation period from 2009 to 2012. But then we see a reversal from 2012 to 2018 post-implementation. In the upper right panel, we see Black matriculants. They were on the decline, became very flat. Then post-implementation, we see a reversal. Latino students, bottom left panel. They were already on the rise. The rise steepened, and then it continued on post-implementation. So this data is very nice because it gives us a good sense of what can happen when those standards are changed. Interestingly enough, we implemented a new program at UD in 2012, which held similar principles as what was requested by the LCME standards. And this program is called ADAPT, Advancing Diversity in Physical Therapy. I received a President's Diversity Initiative Award back in 2012 to start this program. And the whole purpose of the program was really to identify underrepresented students in our own university from our primary feeder program, which is an exercise science program, and really try to guide them and help them throughout their 4 years of undergraduate. So we try to make contact when they're freshmen, and a lot of it's relationship building, advisement of students. We provide tutoring services, assistance with GRE prep courses. We do paid summer research experiences, all in an effort to essentially provide a concierge service for these students to really help them to understand what they need to do to be a successful applicant and to be a successful DPT student. And I will tell you that students in our program, our ADAPT program, some have come to the University of Delaware, others have gone to other institutions. I don't really care. I just want to see things move in a different direction. I will also mention that the core principles of this program have actually bled over into how we do business for all of our students. So the really focused advisement conversations that we had with these minority students, we learned a lot. And guess what? The things that they were struggling with and dealing with weren't a whole lot different than what we saw in majority students either. So the way that we advise students in general has really improved on the whole. Now I'd like to show you the impact of the ADAPT program on our student body over the last 10 years. So I'm going to show you data, and I'll mention that the ADAPT program started about 3 years into this 10-year window. So the class of 2011, we had 34 students at the time. Close to 6% of the student body were underrepresented minority students, either Black, Latino, or Native American. During this time period, we also nearly doubled our class size. So this class of 2021 that you see, that class size is 64. We were concerned when we increased class size whether or not we would be able to keep up with diversity. We've done really well. And so what you see is that the class of 2021, which entered last summer, 15.6% of that student body is from underrepresented minority groups. And if you look at all minorities as a whole, 25% roughly of that class are non-white. The other important thing for you to see is that our diversity has increased without any negative impact on the academic profile of our classes. The GPAs have gone up significantly, both cumulative GPAs and prerequisite science GPA. GRE scores have stayed relatively stable. So this has had no negative impact at all. In fact, the impact would appear to be positive in terms of diversification. I won't say that there hasn't been friction along the way or difficulties in figuring this out, but that's what you want. So if we go back to the question, how do we get to where we want to be and who should we emulate? I think we have some clear data to point us in the right direction. The decision to change the LCME standards, it didn't happen overnight, and it required lots of debate over a number of years. We don't have to go through that level of debate because we have actual data on which to base our decision moving forward. We have the data from LCME standards that are published in JAMA. We have some preliminary data from our program at the University of Delaware. So one of my last actions as a member of the APTA Board of Directors was to put forth a recommendation to the board. And that recommendation was that the APTA Board of Directors petition CAPTA to augment their current standards and required elements by having standalone required elements focused on diversity with distinct evidence for compliance requirements that demonstrate engagement and ongoing and systematic efforts to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion within physical therapy education. So specifically, our request is that, not that we change the language in the required element, but our request is that we pull out the statement number 1 that you see here from required element 5A. This is the exact language already used. Recruitment practices are designed to enhance diversity of the student body. but we want it to be a standalone requirement with its own list, its own distinct list of evidence for compliance requirements, which would include creating and regularly updating goals regarding recruitment, creating diverse applicant pipelines, adopting and enacting equitable admissions processes, creating and describing a systematic assessment approach. In regards to retention, we use the same approach by pulling this statement out of required element 5E with a distinct evidence of compliance list. Create and regularly update goals regarding retention, create inclusive learning environments, engage in retention efforts, create and describe a systematic assessment approach. So this recommendation will go forward from APTA in the near future. I'm hopeful that CAPTA will be receptive to this recommendation and take action in the same way that LCME did for medical schools. The data on LCME standards would suggest that positive changes will occur. This will provide accountability for all of us in physical therapy education. So now we've talked about what things we can do as a profession, but I also think it's important to talk about what we can do as individuals. And I will say that during this tumultuous time in our country, I've been asked by many white friends and colleagues what they should do to help make things better. I understand and I appreciate the question. And if I truly put myself into their shoes, I can understand why they wouldn't understand my experiences as a Black person in America. Why would they understand what it's like to have someone scream the N-word at you as if it were your name and accuse you of only selling drugs and killing people in front of a whole group of people while you're just out for exercise on a nice Saturday afternoon? Why would they understand my experiences as a Black physical therapist, overhearing a patient asking to be scheduled with a white physical therapist instead of me? Or why would they understand what it's like to be a Black man in academia, having a faculty colleague from my own college refuse to get on an elevator as I held the door for her because she didn't recognize me with my glasses on? These are the trials, tribulations, labels that I must contend with in daily life. I've never publicly spoken of these things, and that's because it's painful. So while I understand the question, what can I do to help? I would like to encourage each individual to do some soul searching before just asking that question of people, particularly if you don't have a relationship with them. And here's some things that I would ask each person to consider. First, understand the burden that is placed on people of color to explain the whys and hows of systemic inequities in our country and to provide answers on how to fix them. They already live it on a regular basis, and the burden of expressing the challenges can be mentally exhausting. So please just keep that in mind. The next key is self-education. Educate yourself about disparities in healthcare. Educate yourself in the experiences of others who don't look like you. This is a lesson that we all need. I can tell you that I have learned so much during this time about the experiences of other minority groups that I never even considered. Educate yourself about the true history of race relations in our country. We all know that knowledge provides power. So after doing some self-education, when you then initiate a conversation with a person of color about what can be done to improve things in society, you'll come with a base of knowledge that doesn't fully place the burden on someone else. Third, pay attention to what's happening around you. If you do this, I promise you that you will see many places where you can step into the gap. I've had several situations in my life where people that I either knew well or didn't know at all have stepped in to say or do something when an inequity was occurring. And it feels amazing to not have to be the one to always confront every situation and to have someone who will speak up and do the right thing. For our students, I would ask you, speak up when another classmate or when an instructor says something insensitive to one of your peers. For our faculty, Go out of your way to speak to students of color, get to know them, and over time, get a handle on their experiences in your program. For practicing clinicians, ask yourself if all patients are being treated in the same way in your clinical environment. Do audits, look at your outcomes, look at treatment plans. When you know where disparities exist, you have an opportunity to make a change. Finally, be a mentor to someone who doesn't look like you. I already spoke about mentoring to usher people into the profession, but now I want to emphasize mentoring to make people feel included in the profession. As I talk about this point, I'm going to provide you with the names of some prominent physical therapists who don't look anything like me, but whether they know it or not, have inspired me to be on the pathway that I'm on right now. I have enough confidence in myself, thanks to my parents, to know that I would have been successful in any chosen career path. But without the encouragement of certain people along the way, I can't tell you that I would have definitely been seeing that success occur within the profession of physical therapy. So I'm going to take a few moments to talk about some of these folks who have influenced me. First up are Tony DeLito and Lynn Snyder-Mackler. These two have been plotting to pull me in as deeply as they could into the profession from the very beginning. I applied to both Pitt and to Delaware for PT school. I went to University of Delaware as an undergraduate, so I'd already met Lynn by the time I went to visit Pitt. And when I was there, I met with Tony, who took me on a tour, and at some point in the conversation, he said to me, you know, well, Lynn and the UD folks, they might convince you to go to UD for PT school, and that would be a good choice, but you definitely need to come back here to do your PhD at Pitt. It wasn't until years later that I remembered that conversation, actually. But about 5 years later, after some more behind the scenes plotting between the two of them, I found myself moving to Pittsburgh and starting a PhD at Pitt. Even after I joined the faculty at UD, I would occasionally hear from Lynn that she and Tony were talking about me and they didn't think I was publishing enough and that I needed to buckle down more, and so I did. Every push from them let me know that they were committed to seeing me succeed. In particular, Tony has always had a vision for my future, even when I wasn't sure what my own vision was. That's what real support looks like from a mentor. I would also mention Paul Mettler, who was the chair of the UD physical therapy program when I was a student here, and Stuart Bender McLeod, who was a professor at the time, and he was my chair when I joined the faculty at UD. Both of these men consistently encouraged me to pursue doctoral training when I was a PT student. And Stuart, when I was a junior faculty member, he gave me a tremendous amount of support to grow. And then there's Tara Jo Manal, who was one of my very first clinical instructors at UD. She instilled in me a high level of confidence in my own skills, and it really cemented my love for the spine. She told me that I was a star, and I believed it. When people are encouraged and supported, they're able to plant themselves firmly and flourish. So I would suggest that you ask these folks how to make things better. I'm sure that they can provide some good answers. So what will be different when we get there? What's the potential impact of all this work? I believe that if we enact a comprehensive and coordinated approach to these issues, we will have improved the long-term sustainability of our profession by attracting strong physical therapists who will fully invest in the profession because they know that they have a viable future here. We will have improved the cultural competence of all providers, leading to improved outcomes for all patients. We will have improved financial outcomes for organizations who focus on innovation. We will have stronger and more informed clientele base who seek out physical therapists as frontline providers. We will have improved access to care for all people. We will have financial savings for the entire healthcare system. And finally, if we enact a comprehensive and coordinated approach to these issues, we will actually be in a position to fully realize this vision statement and the mission statement for our profession. And that's where we want to be. So thank you for taking the time today to listen to this inaugural Lynda Woodruff lecture. I hope that you heard something today that makes you think about things differently and act accordingly in alignment with your own conscience. I've presented some of my ideas today, but there's so many other ideas out there. The key though is that we act upon these ideas and we stop with the lip service. I would like to challenge each of you to think about how you can be an agent of change as an individual physical therapist in your own community. And I want to encourage you to talk with your physical therapy colleagues within your sphere of influence to determine how your company, your clinic, your DPT program can make positive changes that will diversify our profession, reduce disparities in care, and make the profession of physical therapy a beacon of equity and inclusion within our nation's healthcare system. Thank you.
We hope that you enjoyed that provocative lecture by Dr. Hicks. Please join us for part 2, an interactive panel discussion with representatives from each sponsoring organization to answer the call to action from Dr. Hicks' lecture. Dr. Hicks will recap his major points and then moderate a discussion with representatives from the Physical Therapy Learning Institute, the American Academy of Physical Therapy, the APTA, the National Association of Black Physical Therapists, and Dr. Sonora Simpson. As a reminder, each organization would welcome your donation to support their work. We also would like to thank the UNC Division of Physical Therapy for their donation. Please take a moment to visit the websites and please donate to help continue Dr. Woodruff's legacy. We look forward to you also joining us during the discussion on July 8th.